Been looking over a couple of motorcycles with big service, greasing all the moving parts, looking over the suspension on all of them, and a friend's bike also. He ended up helping out some with planting the forest, so that was nice. And the house has been seeing some remodeling, so I stay busy even if it's not on the forest machines. This video will mainly be about getting the Poclain excavator back up and running. Even if it's been under the roof and nothing had moved and never been started, it's as if it was getting oily up here near the injectors and valve covers, so leans towards the valve covers. Little spoiler, it is the valve covers, but maybe went a little crazy ensuring everything was clean up here with the brake cleaner. Wrapped some paper around all the valve covers, and after a little while it was oily, so it for sure leaks here. The tractor tire, I tried putting a tube inside. The tube started working its way out through the damage and got pinched, so this time around it was taken to a tire shop. Even if this is probably also short term, it's on the side of the tire that it's damaged. The oil plug on my car had kind of busted up threads. Turned out it was a lot cheaper with a new oil sump than even buying the thread repair kit for that size, and that didn't even have the drill, so and it was nothing in the way of the frame of the car, so it was quite easy to just replace the sump. The forest car was also given an oil change and a new oil filter. The filter was a bit deep down there and needed the air filter removed, but not too bad. Had found my dad's motorcycle had a leaking rear shock, so that needed some new seals, about the price of repacking a hydraulic cylinder of one of the forest machines. Drained the gearboxes for the tracks again, and now it seems I've flushed out most of that probably sand-filled liquid that was in there at first with all the neglect this machine has had. There is still some stuff coming out. I might have found the reason why it's been a lot of kind of dirt in there, because now that we filled it all the way up, we started seeing major leaks. So the axle going out from the gearbox section, the seal on that is pretty much non-existent, so we ended up doing an emergency start and pushing it up so we could get some little wooden pieces under there and collect the oil that was draining out. And with just that short start, the top, the valve covers, the paper around it was quite oily in spots. The hydraulic filters, the breather filter here and the two main filters, they will all be replaced. I did also measure up and buy new O-rings for the lids and the seal on the filter cage itself, the filter holder. So, and the little extra tank for the diesel heater was leaking. After I had added that filter, I had moved the little valve here too much, so we were trying to save that and reuse it, but it had probably been assembled with some strong Loctite because it broke. Found a little bit of corrosion. Luckily I had some spare parts for my dad's shock on the bike laying around. The hydraulic filter is held in place. It has magnets in it. It's just a cotter pin, and then it could be unbolted by hand. Needed a few taps to get it off the holder itself. Nothing to talk about on the magnet. Everything looked really good on both filters. Open up the cover on the back of the tank. There is a kind of a plunger down there, because you can pull it up a little and remove the thing securing it, and then let it down, and then you kind of seal off the suction for the big pump. I moved the seal on that plunger maybe and removing it, so that was fixed. And then we started siphoning out the oil from the tank. We did place out the bark beetle traps this year, so also I will check them in a little bit. I have seen signs that they are eating up some of the tree stumps that were left after last winter's logging, so they are around. Some measurements to buy new O-rings for the lids and such. We had ended up sucking up the oil from a little, like a cavity where the big pump sucks from, that's a little kind of higher than the bottom of the tank itself, so used a small syringe to take a sample from the outside, and what came up was some real ugly grey sludgy stuff, still liquid. We ended up sucking out a couple of those big oil suction things full with mostly grey stuff, so a couple of liters of nastiness was at the bottom. And then we started a new siphoning to drain the rest. And the bottom of the tank is kind of rusty and looks a little black. Found a few surprises down there with the plastic rings from the oil kegs that had made it past the filter. It's probably been filled without the filter in place at some point, but there is like a big coarse mesh dividing the two sides where the filter sits and the side where it sucks oil from. My dad's cars get some ABS fault warning here and there, and it bugs the hell out of him because he loses cruise control, so we tried at least giving it some fresh brake fluid. What came out didn't look all that bad, and it didn't solve the problem, so more on that later maybe. Could start putting a few things back in place. The lid for that manhole cover for the, well, not fully sized for a man, but and it was time to get the wood under a roof because we had a nice dry spring, so we started by lifting out last year's wood, well, older wood, because we want the newest processed the furthest in, and then it was just a matter of fitting all of it under a roof again. I also received some forest plants that I've finished getting planted. That will be a little more about that in probably the next video. New filters, a little tricky to get them into place with the magnets pulling on them. So a set of extra hands was nice. And then it was given 80 liters of fresh brand new oil, but we also reused a lot of what was siphoned out of the tank. Lids for the hydraulic filters could be fitted back with new filters under them. The fill plugs at the top here seems to be a very odd thread. One of them is at least steel, and they are quite chewed up from using a pipe wrench. One was put in the blasting cabinet and will have a nut welded. And then coupling was fitted to that new tank for the external diesel's tank for heater. Time to tackle the valve covers. I had ordered a couple of new ones because I could see that several of them had cracked and been repaired with some epoxy stuff. And didn't have time for more that day, so put some clean rag over it. Since the valve covers were off, I checked the valves and all of them were a bit on the loose side, so I figured I might as well tighten them up a little. Had my dad help with cranking the engine to find the correct position, and then adjusting them, holding with a screwdriver and crow's feet while first tightening it up helped it not move when doing the final tightening. And They are still on the loose side, but better loose than too tight, because then you burn things up. With the valves adjusted, it was time to put some new valve covers on there, and that didn't go as planned. Had new seals, 6 new valve covers. The seals have kind of a bit of adhesive to hold them in place. It wasn't holding it very well, but tightening the new one up, it cracked long before the 12 Newton meter that the manual calls from, but these are probably some cheapo reproductions. And once tightened up, the adhesive got it stuck really well to the valve cover, so getting the seal back off to reuse on one of the old valve covers was hard, so took a little damage, but we added some silicone there. I went with just 5 Newton meters for the rest of them, and that seems to be about where you want to be with cheapo reproduction valve covers, at least. The last one I couldn't fit because it was curing with some silicone to help seal it. Time to look at the ventilator filter for the hydraulic tank. That one seems impossible to get hold of, but it felt really old and kind of oil soaked, and a paper filter. I'm sure it worked fine, but I felt better to replace it, and I had some foam material made if you want to make a custom filter for a motorcycle, and figured I could do like a donut with that filter media, just some cutting and to length and making a circle, some silicone, let that cure overnight also. Next day, valve cover, last one could go into place, and then the filter, this foam filter material, you should add some air filter oil to it, really sticky stuff, some plastic gloves. I do have used some dirt bikes that use this style of filters, and you want to push out as much oil as you possibly can, especially for an application like this. And then just putting that in place, put the cover over. Also changed the washer on the bolt here instead of just a normal washer, because I think this low point might collect a little water. I changed it to one of those Tredo washers with a little bit of rubber. Replace the wiring for the pressure sensor on the filter. You can hear the air force are out playing. A little more cleaning on some cover plates for the engine. Here you can also hear the air force. Gave the cable that operates kind of a little flap that chooses if the diesel heater blows air onto the engine or into the cab. It can be nice in the winter to have when it's you have started the engine and you let the diesel heater run a little longer and help heat up the cab. It's kind of a stupid design. It's too close to the exhaust, so the cable has gotten kind of damaged there, and it's prone to rust and not sealed very well. But some lube and it started moving again, so good enough for now. Gave the inlet for the cooling air some cleaning. There is kind of a middle spacer here with that has kind of a brush here that the belt for the fan runs through. Kind of a lot of caked in dirt there, and the brush material here was kind of filled with grease oil that got soaked in some old cleaning diesel for a while and cleaned up quite nicely. Tried at first to add that kind of spacer ring and then the trumpet or intake behind, but that was too hard. There are many bolts holding these two together and just 4 bolts holding the spacer to the engine, so took it off and went back to bolting this together first. By then the brush part was cleaned also, so that could be mounted. It's quite tricky, a couple of the bolts here. The two top bolts are not that stupidly hard, but at least one here at the bottom you have to dig real deep inside, and it's not an ear with a nut behind it, it's a hole that's threaded that you need to fit, but eventually I got it there. And then the rubber hose, because it sucks air for the air filter, the intake from here, and then that other cover for the engine. We ended up drilling a hole in one of the covers here so you can see the hydraulic oil level without opening it, so you can do it without, just for it to be easier. And it was time to start it. Sounds really happy, and it could be moved out and given a little test. We had a little bit of oil spill because the caps for filling hydraulic oil wasn't tightened properly, but seems to be dry around the valve covers now at least. A little cleaning up, know a few small hydraulics leak that might be looked at before it gets moved far into the forest again. Some cleaning up, and that's it for now. Hope everyone has a great summer.